Now, we mentioned a little bit about infinite loops as well in the principles of programming, and also last week when you were trying out some of the exercises. And we said that sometimes you can accidentally write what's known as an infinite loop, which is a loop that will never end. Okay, and we talked last week a little bit about those of you who are of a certain age will remember possibly in early home computers using typing this sort of thing into BASIC and creating your own deliberate infinite loop. And this is an example of an infinite loop in BASIC, where you say do this instruction, and then the second instruction says go back and do the first instruction again. That's an infinite loop. It'll never end. It'll always print hello world, and then go back and print hello world, and then go back and print hello world forever and ever. Okay, and sometimes you want to set up something like that. Very often, though, you've accidentally done something wrong, and you've accidentally got stuck in an infinite loop. So here are some modern examples of an infinite loop in Python. This says whilst x is greater than or equal to 3, then print x, and then add 1 to x, which means it'll only if this, assuming this x is already 3, this while loop, or 3 or above, this while loop will run. But then once you're in the while loop, you'll never get out of it, because it'll always run whilst x is greater than or equal to 3, and we're adding 1 each time, so it's gonna get higher and higher. So it'll always be greater than or equal to 3. That loop will never end. Similarly, this is an example. You tend to use this kind of statement when you want to create a deliberate while loop, and you'll see examples of that later in the course. While true basically means whilst true is true. It's a shorthand for saying this is an infinite loop. It's a Boolean value of true. It basically just says keep doing this forever. And that's an example where you'd want to create a deliberate infinite loop, for example. Now, we mentioned last week, if you do find yourself getting stuck in one of these infinite loops, and you will at some point, I can guarantee it, you can interrupt the kernel, and you had a practice doing that last week by clicking the interrupt button, and you have to often give it a minute. Sometimes it's not instant, depending on what it's doing in the background. Also, worth noting, if it's currently expecting a user input, and remember that on VS Code that appears at the top, and sometimes you don't notice it, you have to, even if you click interrupt, it will still wait for the user to input before it interrupts. So you'd have to type something in or hit enter. And that would then complete the user input. So it will run to the end of the current instruction. And of course, the current instruction, if it's waiting for user input, is to get the user input.